Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now without further ado, let's go. I went to the movies last night to watch Halloween Ends on opening night. I had just gotten off work and was still in my suit, but I said screw it because I was too lazy to go home and change into more casual clothes, and then drive to the movies. I sat down in my seat with my snacks, and during the previews I saw a toddler come into the theater that didn't look old enough for kindergarten yet, accompanied by a kid who looked to be in middle school. And then their mother comes into the theater right behind them, and I saw the mother was holding her third kid, an actual baby, who couldn't have been an older than 1 year at best. They sit down in the row seats directly below me. The way a theater is built has each row of seats consisting of luxury recliners with walls facing them, separating them from the next row down. I couldn't actually see this mother and her kids unless I got out of my seat, stood up to look down on the row at them, or unless they were just entering the theater to sit down. At that point my brain is just screaming, are you serious right now? Like, are you really serious with this? You're going to bring a baby and a toddler into a horror movie? Not just any horror movie, mind you, but the horror movie of one of the most terrifying slasher icons, Michael Myers. To say I was already very annoyed that this mother's decision-making was an understatement, because she's not only going to cause her baby and toddler to get seriously scared by bringing them here, but I guess that she also wouldn't be doing anything to calm them down if one or the other started crying or being too loud during the movie. Lo and behold, I was right. Multiple times throughout the first half of the movie the baby started briefly crying or letting out a single loud bitch cry. It was loud enough that you could obviously hear it interrupt the sounds and dialogue of the movie. I was already mad at the woman for her garbage decision making and entitled behavior by bringing in children that shouldn't have been there, and were all but guaranteed to interrupt the movie for everyone else, but her not doing anything to quiet them down was the final straw. And just to clarify for everyone who may ask, this mother did not get up even once to take her baby outside a theater to calm it down. This baby was consistently loud and disruptive the whole time the family was there. I got out of the seat and walked out of the theater to a couple of employees outside of that particular theater and explained the situation. They said they would contact their manager to come into the theater and get the woman and her kids to leave. I go back into the theater, and before long 15 or 20 minutes have passed with no sight of the manager or employees in the theater. During that time period the baby is still loudly whining and crying here and there, once again stopping me from really enjoying the movie. At that point the movie hadn't reached its bloody gory climax, but I was going to wait around until then or afterwards for this to get addressed and risk the chance of that baby and slasher toddler to get scared out of their minds and ruin it for me and everyone else. I got up again and went to talk to the employees again, and that's when they finally got their manager to go into the theater and talk to the woman to get her and her kids to leave. I stood off to the side by the giant hole when you enter the theater watching the movie as a manager, and an employee talked with the mother, so I never got to see what actually happened or what was said. The mother and her two younglings had already interrupted the movie enough for me, and I wasn't going to miss another second by focusing on them about to get kicked out. A little over 5 minutes later the employee came back by me and said they are about to leave the theater. I saw the mother carrying her baby followed by her middle school aged child, and the toddler carrying her sippy cup leaving the movie theater. I and everyone else finally got to watch the rest of the movie in peace, which was about another 40 to 45 minutes, and just so happened to be the best part of the movie. After the movie was over I found the manager that kicked the mother and her kids out to thank her for fixing the problem. She told me it was no big deal and that actually legally the mother should have never been allowed to see that movie in the first place. According to the theater's policy, children under 6 old cannot enter R-rated movies after 6 p.m. So the mother shouldn't have been allowed to buy tickets in the first place, considering she had a toddler and a baby was her. However, the employee that sold her the tickets was being trained and didn't know about that policy yet, so he mistakenly sold her the tickets. The manager told me that because of that, the mother was entitled to a refund of her movie tickets, which I understood. It didn't matter in the end though, as a toddler and the baby didn't see the goriest and scariest parts of the movie, nor did the best part of the movie get ruined for me and everyone else in that theater. So to start, I love my dogs. I have 2 dogs that I frequently take out for walks even during the pandemic. Both are rescues and have gone through way more hard stuff than I did. I decided to take Josephine, the oldest, out for a walk since Millie, the youngest, is fast asleep. We took the route we usually take when we go out for walks. I then noticed that there is a new donut shop that opened. The donuts looked nice and delicious, so I decided to grab some. Only thing is no dogs are allowed to go inside, but the owners were nice to leave a spot outside for dogs. It had a bowl full of water as well, so I put Josephine outside. I was inside for like 5 minutes or something since there were like 3 people already there. I was just browsing through Reddit Then I heard my dog scream. Then I saw this lady smacking my dog with her umbrella at full force numerous times. I quickly rush outside and say, "What are you doing, lady?" I then took away Josephine, but she still tried to smack her. She even hit me in the leg a couple times. I kid you not, these are the exact words that came out of this lady's mouth. "Your dog scratched my car." Her car was across the street, by the way, far away from Josephine. She went to this friend and said that I let my dog wander outside without a leash, and that she had to chain my dog after she scratched her car. I don't know if you've been following the story, but I chained my dog way before this lady started hitting her. I was legitimately confused. I immediately called the cops and the cops arrived while she was still ranting, and then I had to pay for her car with my insurance. I'm 15, by the way, and I don't know anything about this insurance thing, so the cops intervened and tried to calm the situation down. The lady then decided to play the victim and said that my dog viciously attacked her. My dog did attack her since she was getting hit with an umbrella by a person she didn't know. The cops pulled her to the side and let her tell her side of the story. I think I heard stuff like my dog scratched her car and attacked her, and that she bravely chained my dog. Cops did the same to me, then pulled me to the side, and I got to tell my side of the story. They then asked the shop owner if they could see the cameras outside the shop while I was tending my dog, check in for any wounds. I saw the cops handcuff the lady after they were done watching the footage and forcefully shoved her in the car because she was resisting arrest. She then threatened to sue me for harassment while screaming profanities. 3 days later, no one sued me yet. My dog and I are fine, but she was whimpering all throughout the situation. Sadly, she got traumatized. She's still recovering and we're now doing well. A little update: I was gonna sue her for animal abuse and later found out that she was already in jail for insurance fraud and assault. I don't know about the insurance fraud part, but she apparently tried to push her coworker out of a window. At least that's what I heard, which isn't assault but attempted murder anyway. I didn't continue with the charges because she's serving 5 years in prison now. I would try to sue her and try to extend her sentence, but I don't want to go through a whole process just to make someone's life a lot more miserable. People have lost that last bit of sanity during these troubling times. Okay, so I smoke cigars, mostly cheap factory rejects, but an occasional good one too. I do not smoke in my house or around other people, as I know a very select group of people enjoy that particular aroma. Another point to note here is I drive my youngest to and from school, seeing as the weather in my neck of the woods is bipolar at best. So sitting yesterday afternoon, I parked way outside the school zone in a line to pick up kids probably a block away in a residential neighborhood. I drive a big truck with a loud exhaust system. The players are me, Karen, and the school principal. I'm in a line of vehicles, engine off, listening to a good book on Audible, smoking the last bit of a good cigar. For those who don't know, a cigar can be sit down and refreshed if need be. Also, I never smoke on school grounds and always have it out before my kid gets in a truck. It's my truck, and no one else drives it, so I don't mind the smell of tobacco, and I have a bottle of Febreze that I use every couple of days anyway. About 5 minutes later, I see a woman gets out of her car and begin to approach me. I watched her walk up past the 2 vehicles behind me and heading my way. She's got a typical Karen look: hair, clothes, way too much makeup, and the like. She comes up right on my window and just stands there looking at me. I rolled my window down all the way and asked her if she needed anything, and the dialogue was as follows: "What do you think you're doing? Excuse me? You're smoking the pot." Yes, she called it the pot on school grounds. "You should be ashamed of yourself. What are you talking about? I can see it in your hand and smell it." "Well, obviously you can't smell it because this is a cigar." "I don't think so. I am calling the police." "Knock yourself out, you weirdo." After her brain short circuits from being talked to like that, she tried to open my door, which was locked. Then she reached in my window and tried to grab the cigar out of my mouth. Now, life has taught us all from a young very age that fire is hot, and things that burn from fire are also hot, but physics never seemed to be on the forefront of these jerks. So she immediately burned her hand on the cigar and jumped back, screaming that I did that on purpose. I started laughing because it was funny. She then tried the door again, and I obliged by opening it as hard as I could, which knocked her back onto her back, which made me laugh even more. "You jerk, I'm going to report you for assault. I'm going to get you and your kid kicked out of here." "Yeah, whatever, Karen, go back to your car before you have a heart attack." She walked back to her car, all the while yelling obscenities. I made sure to keep an eye on her in my rear view until we got closer to the school. Now, the school principal is always outside directing traffic between the parents and school buses. He and I know each other because being in a northern state, but being fans of the U of Miami is not something you see a lot up here, so we've talked about football and other stuff about the school, so he knows me a little. And my truck is unique in size, color, and exhaust. As I'm waiting to pull up to the place where you pick up your kid, I see Karen park, get out, and head directly towards the principal. She made sure to walk by me and give me dirty looks, like I guess that was supposed to intimidate me or something. Spoiler alert, it didn't. She gave the principal an earful. Couldn't quite hear what she said, but made sure to be as dramatic as possible, probably telling him I'm a drug addict and a monster and all. That principal is doing his best to direct traffic and put up with her nonsense, and I assumed said something to placate her because she walked away all smug and again made sure to walk by me so I could see her big grin. I smiled back and waved at her sassily. I pulled up and my kid got in, and as I figured he would, the principal came over to me. Did you really put a plant of pot out on her hand and slam your door into her head? He asked me. That's so stupid. I don't even know where to start. First she reached into my vehicle and tried to get the cigar out of my mouth, and she burned her own hand like the dummy she is. Second, she tried to open my door not once but twice, so I applied to her the second time. Third, if I opened the door as hard as I could into her head, she'd be knocked out on the road if she got bruised along with her ego. That's just tough crap, I guess. The principal sighs voluptuously and says, that's about what I thought happened. Just do me a favor and don't retaliate. Okay. I don't need another headache. No worries from me, man, just here to pick up the kid. Go Canes. My kid put up the U symbol as we drove away, and that's it. I'll be picking up the kid later today again, so hopefully there is no repeat to that nonsense. Karen will be so thrilled to know that I didn't get the outcome she thought I would. After telling the principal, at least she got what she deserves and had her hands burned and her butt falling to the floor. I mean, that's what happens when you don't mind your own business. When my father moved from Ohio to Sacramento in the 1950s, he initially had 6 roommates, 2 per room, so they could keep things as affordable as possible. In the fall, the residents would rake their leaves into large piles in the gutter/side of the street. The city would send out vacuum trucks and collect the leaves on specific prearranged days, while some kids thought it was great fun to drive their car through the big piles of leaves and scatter them everywhere. My father and his roommates would then have to scramble to take everything back into a pile, or the city would not vacuum up the unorganized leaves. After about 3 weeks of this, one of his roommates, who worked graveyard shift as a mechanic at the municipal bus yard, was tired of screwing around with the leaves. After a long night of work without telling the other roommates, when he left for work, he dropped an engine plug off his truck and covered it in a big pile of leaves at around 2 a.m. There was a horrific crash that woke up all the neighbors. Fortunately, the kids in the car were not beat up too badly, since the car was not only going about 15 miles per hour upon impact. It turns out the kid who was driving was the son of a police officer. When the cops contacted his father, he asked if his son was injured. When he was told he was fine, his father told the cops to let him walk home, and not under any circumstances were they to give any of the kids a ride home. That must have been a long cold walk. In the morning, when the roommate returned from his shift, he came into the house and said something like, "You never know why you're going to catch when you go fishing." I interpreted this story as a warning that screwing with people might be funny the first few times. More than 2 times the same joke is no longer funny. For context, I'm a 17-year-old male working for my local McDonald's in a Midwestern USA, and this happened last night. We have a regular, the Karen in the story, who always come through our drive-thru and orders 2 large iced teas and a large Colombian coffee. In case you aren't familiar, some McDonald's stores sell a Colombian brew coffee, which has a much stronger flavor, way more of a kick to it, just as bitter as a Karen's soul. How fitting whenever there is an order for 3 or more drinks. We assume that they will want a drink tray because it makes things work better and quicker for us. However, Karen does not want a drink tray. In fact, you think she's allergic to them. If you try to give her one, she snaps at you and tries to boss you around. My coworker, who I will call Jemima, didn't know about her aversion to drink trays because she normally works different shifts and had never dealt with her before. She handed her drinks out on a tray, and Karen took the drink tray and threw it at her, pressed it right back into the window. Jemima was shaking naturally and told the manager what happened last night. Karen came through the drive-thru again, and this time Jemima was at the first window where you pay for your food. She got a manager, and not just any manager, our general manager, who is the highest person on the ladder in our store. The next level is original manager, who takes care of the 8 stores owned by our franchise. He happened to be right there, and he knew what happened. He sold Karen her coffees, but only after making it clear that she was not allowed to come back after what she did. If she comes back, not only will we ban her from all 8 stores, all the McDonald's stores in our area are owned by the same family, so she will almost certainly have to drive at least 40 minutes or something to get to a McDonald's she's allowed to go to. But we will also call the cops on her for trespassing. She got to my window and said, "I don't want to drink tray," and I just said, "I know." That as sassily as my thoroughly not sassy personality would allow. Update: she came back today. The official policy about what to do about her hadn't gotten around to all of the managers yet, but one of the managers there tonight sent the GM a message letting him know she came by. Hopefully by the next time she comes back, everybody knows about it and we can call the authorities on a Karen. Thank you for watching. Dorothy stood in the kitchen and thoughtfully washed the kettle for about 10 minutes, thinking about when all this would end and how she would get out of this situation. She felt that she no longer believed in her marriage, and it depressed her more and more. and how well it had all started. Nathan was courting her romantically and charmingly. He serenaded her under the windows, gave her flowers every day, and always different ones, until he had realized that she loved orchids most of all, and after that he gave them only. And Dorothy thought then that it would be like that forever, maybe without orchids, but certainly with Nathan next to her. Soon Nathan asked Dorothy to be his wife, and she immediately agreed. She seemed to glow with happiness at the wedding, and Nathan kept whispering his vows of eternal love to her. They lived in Nathan's apartment that his parents had presented to him a few years ago. The apartment was next to the office where Dorothy and her college friend Sharon had been working as designers for 3 years. True, Sharon soon got married too, and moved in with her husband to a neighboring city. Dorothy liked the apartment. The only thing that annoyed her was that one of the 2 rooms was filled with musical instruments. Nathan was a musician and a bandleader, but they had no success and their performances brought no money. Everything Nathan could earn outside musical activities was usually spent on rehearsals and transportation of equipment. At first Dorothy's domestic problems did not bother her, as she was working and had enough money, but then giving birth to a child, Dorothy immersed herself in home life and felt how much she missed Nathan's help. He was always away at rehearsals, dealing with some band issues and coming home late, almost always drunk. Dorothy longed to feed him dinner and just talk, but she did not want to be a capricious and grumpy wife, and she said nothing. One day after her son was born, she asked Nathan to go for a walk with little Spencer, as she wanted to sleep for at least half an hour and get some rest. But her husband just looked at her in surprise and irritably said, "These are your responsibilities, Dorothy. I can't do all this nonsense. Do you want me to become a well-known musician or not?" And then Dorothy clearly understood that nothing was going to change, and it wasn't because he hadn't given her orchids for a long time. Nathan had changed a lot, and he didn't care about her and Spencer. Dorothy was ready for one last conversation with her husband, but disaster struck. Her mother died of an illness. After the funeral, Dorothy fell into a stupor and depression. Nathan started bringing orchids again, and Dorothy even thought that in this way he was trying to support her, but as it turned out it was something else entirely. Soon, Nathan started talking about selling her mother's apartment. He offered to use the proceeds to buy a minibus, which he planned to use to go to rehearsals and tours. Dorothy almost laughed because her husband had never been away for performances beyond the local clubs, but she didn't argue, and they bought the car and put the rest of the money in the bank. But of course everything went on as before. Spencer started teething and Dorothy could not sleep at night, listening to the moans of her baby, and Nathan was often absent at such nights. But his band performances did not add money to the house, and they lived, in fact, only on the children's allowance. One day the telephone rang, and Dorothy was overjoyed to hear the cheerful voice of her friend. Sharon reported that she and her husband would soon be going on vacation abroad, and she tearfully asked Dorothy to stay in their home and look after Rocky the Spaniel. Dorothy was happy because she had longed for a change of scenery, at least for a while. She shared her worries with Sharon, and her friend said firmly, "That's it, it's settled. Come to us with Spencer, I'll be back from vacation, we'll figure it out. Maybe you do not have to go back to your husband. Stay here, find a job, and you can live with us while you need. The house is big." And Dorothy made up her mind. She hastily stuffed some of her things and Spencer's clothes into the suitcase, took her documents and driver's license. She left Nathan a note explaining that she was leaving for good and would file for divorce. While Dorothy was putting the baby seat in the car, she realized that it was getting dark and cold outside. She drove to a gas station on the outskirts of the city, filled a full tank, but a few dozens of kilometers away the car stalled. Realizing they would not make it to the nearest settlement on foot, Dorothy tried to call, but as luck would have it, there was no connection in the area. Then she tried to give signs to passing cars honking and flashing their lights, but no one stopped. 2 hours passed. It was deep into the night and the highway was completely deserted. But then the lights of a car appeared in the distance. Dorothy ran out onto the road in despair and waved her hands. The Jeep stopped next to the woman and a man got out. He tried to find out what was wrong, but Dorothy was so cold and tired that she could hardly speak. From her confused story, he only understood that they were going to the same city, that her car had broken down for some reason, and that the baby was freezing in it. "Okay, let's do this. Get your things and the baby and his car seat out of the car and come over to my car. Don't worry, we are in the same direction anyways. I'll take you where you need to be, and tomorrow you can call a tow truck which will take your car to the station. Dorothy immediately agreed. The prospect of freezing in the car together with the baby really frightened her. Already in the car, the man introduced himself as Gregory. He told her that he was going to his parents, who lived in the same city as her friend. His father had opened a new branch in that city, while he was in charge of the old one. The man smiled and added good-naturedly that his parents would probably be the best people on earth if they didn't torture him with their desire to marry him quickly. Better not rush into it, Dorothy blurted out. Gregory was surprised and cautiously asked, "Excuse me, are you speaking from your own experience?" And Dorothy suddenly felt completely unashamed to tell the stranger about everything, and that her dreams of family happiness had crashed on daily life, and that she had to flee from her husband from her hometown, and that everything began with a great love. Gregory listened to her thoughtfully, and for a while they drove in silence. "Dorothy, can you help me?" he suddenly asked. "You saved us today. I owe you one. Tell me, what can I help you with, and I'll see what I can do." And Gregory told Dorothy that once upon a time he had had a girlfriend, but she had left him for a richer businessman from Greece. Then his parents decided to introduce him to a woman who worked at his father's company. She, in their opinion, was pretty and nice with good moral principles. But Gregory flatly refused, and now they remind him again and again of the need to get married. And so Gregory had a brilliant, in his opinion, plan, in order to make them at least temporarily leave him alone. Gregory suggested Dorothy to go together to his parents, and play the role of his bride in front of them. Dorothy at first wanted to give for, but remembered she owed him a debt of gratitude. So she just smiled and agreed. "All right, Gregory, but only tomorrow, because then my friend whom I am driving to is leaving for vacation, and I will have no one to leave my baby with. And I don't think your parents would like a bride with a baby from another man. I'm sure my parents wouldn't be upset if the bride had a child, but in any case, thank you for agreeing. Then I invite you to dinner at our place tomorrow evening." When Gregory picked up Dorothy the next evening, she met him in readiness. He looked at her admiringly and assured her that her parents were definitely like her looks and kind disposition. Dorothy laughed and promised to talk less so as not to give herself away. When Gregory introduced Dorothy to his parents, he was speechless at how warmly they greeted her. It turned out that Dorothy was the same woman who worked in his father's company, and whom the parents knew well and predicted for their son as a bride. When Dorothy returned home, Sharon questioned her about everything, and learning that Gregory was the son of their common boss, her friend gave free rein to her fantasies and told Dorothy how things would go on if, of course, she would not hide her feelings. "Well, I see that you like Gregory and managed to notice, though he has been with us for a short time, that he likes you too. Now stop living in the past or punishing yourself for being wrong about Nathan. You're staying with us, getting a divorce and coming to work for my boss, who may soon become your father-in-law. We'll put Spencer in kindergarten here and everything will be fine. We're all going to bed now. We have an early flight tomorrow, but I will constantly be in touch to be updated on how your relationship is progressing," said Sharon and winked conspiratorially to her friend. And events did develop rapidly, and almost as Sharon predicted. Gregory visited Dorothy every day, and one day finally confessed his feelings to her. And when Dorothy also confessed her feelings in return, Gregory put her and her son in a car and took them to his parents. Dorothy was anxious that they would take the fact that she was not alone and with a child. But when Gregory's mother came up to them, Dorothy was relieved of heart. "Well, hello, little one. I'm your new grandmother," she said amiably and held out her arms to Spencer. Dorothy couldn't believe what was happening. She thought this only happened in the movies, but it wasn't a movie. It was her new happy life, in which there was no place for Nathan. By the way, a year later, she somehow saw a report about her ex-husband, but not about the famous musician, but about the drunken hooligan who burst onto the stage and disrupted the concert of a famous band. Apparently this was the popularity he had dreamed of, but Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first story is titled, "My Brother Demands That I Buy a Lot of Gifts for His Nephews So I Make Him Regret It." I have no children by choice. However, I adore my nephews 9F and 6M. I like to give them things for their birthdays and Christmas, like books or games that I think they might like. Well, last year in November, I got a call from my brother. He told me that he thinks I should try harder with gifts for his kids because I don't have kids of my own and I have a good job. And that he expects me to give them lots of things for Christmas, implying that I wouldn't be able to see them again if I didn't. I don't like it at all, and I think what I do with my money is my business. Personally, I think my brother and sister-in-law are jealous because I travel a lot on vacation, but that's no excuse to be picky. After giving it some thought, I decided to make sure he would never ask for something like that again. I went to the store and told one of the clerks that I wanted the most annoying toys they had. I bought a drum set, 2 trumpets, a children's keyboard, 2 guitars, 2 xylophones, a few sound toys, makeup stuff for little girls, a bracelet making set, glitter. Those are the ones I remember, although there were a few more that dirty a lot. The naive parents were very happy when I told them that I needed help carrying the gifts. They clearly thought I was obeying them and planning to give amazing gifts to my nephews. But that changed when the children began to open the presents. Of course, my nephews were very happy with everything they received and really wanted to start playing. But the best was the face of my brother and sister-in-law, the horror growing with each gift that was opened. It was wonderful. I left a few hours later with a sore head from the noise, but amused because my nephews didn't seem to have any intention of stopping anytime soon. I was reminded of this recently as my niece is going to be 10 in a few weeks. And my brother has been strongly hinting to me that I don't have to spend a lot on gifts and that something simple is more than enough. As far as I know, between my visits and those of other relatives, several toys have been lost or no longer work. I think I'll be nice and just buy my niece a couple of books for her birthday. Addition with minor update, well, I certainly didn't expect so many comments. I just wanted to share something funny that happened to me. But I want to thank all of you for the support you've given me. Especially those who praise my English. And yes, my other 2 languages use the masculine plural to refer to a group, so when you read nephews, I mean my nephew and niece. I've talked to my brother, and he admits that his wife encouraged him to demand more gifts from me. I've told him clearly that he would not accept that again. And if he threatens me again that I will never see my niece and nephew, I will not hesitate to explain the situation to the rest of the family. I know for a fact that my parents would take my side because they don't like my sister-in-law. My niece will receive for her birthday next week a book by C.S. Lewis. I'm sure many of you guess which one, since she has seen the movie recently and loved it. I'll also give her an ordinary toy without unbearable noises. Thanks a lot for your support. Maybe I'll upload more stories from other relatives, although I don't think they fit with this sub, so if I do, it'll be in others. The next story is titled, My Neighbor Insists I Give Up My New House for Her Son, claiming that he deserves it. Hey everyone, just want to let you know that even out here in Turkey, you can't escape entitled and crazy neighbors. At this point, I'm not sure there's any country where you can be safe from these kinds of people. The story starts when my wife and I bought a new house after saving up and living in a small apartment for a few years. It was worth it though because the house was beautiful and on a nice-sized property. One thing I do want to mention is that the way the house is built is a little bit different than some people are used to because the first and second floor have separate entrances and can almost be used like 2 single-floor houses on top of each other. I will bring that up again later though. The property hadn't been maintained exactly how we would have liked it, so we had a little fixing up to do. My wife was mostly working indoors while I was outside working on the lawn. We had a lot of half-dead shrubs and bushes that I could understand somebody moving wouldn't want to deal with. I was just going to pull them all out, plant new ones and seed the dead areas of the lawn. I had many neighbors passing by and asking if we were the new owners of the house. All of them seemed very friendly and welcomed me to the neighborhood. Then I had the woman who lived to the right of me that I'll just refer to as neighbor for the sake of this story. Neighbor didn't actually say anything to me at first and instead stared at me for a very long time. I felt the look before I actually turned my head and saw her, and still she just didn't say anything. Me. Hello? Neighbor. Are you the landscaper? I don't want you leaving any mess over there near my house. Me. Oh no, I actually bought this house with my wife. I promise that everything will get cleaned up though, don't worry. She just looked around a little and kept staring at me and it was getting awkward. Me. Was there something else? Neighbor. You know, this house really would have been perfect for my son. Me. Oh, I mean, it is a nice piece of land. Neighbor. So are you cleaning it up and then putting it back on the market? Because he's very interested in having this house. Me. No, we're just cleaning it for ourselves. She finally walks away and I can get back to work. My next encounter isn't until a few days later when all the pulling is done and I'm mowing the lawn to get everything looking even. She runs out of her house telling me to knock it off with that racket. Keep in mind that this was the middle of a normal day, so this was prime lawn mowing time. She drops more hints about how her son deserves that house and asks again how long before I put it back on the market for him. Then my cat, who is indoor/outdoor, comes to see the commotion and the woman freaks out. She talks about hating animals and she's gonna make sure that my cat is banned. More time goes by before I come home one day and listen to what happened between my neighbor and my wife. She started talking to my wife and saying things that she was so happy we were fixing the house for her son. Also how generous we were for gifting him the house when he was ready to move in. My wife also tried to tell her that we weren't just going to give up a house to give to her son. We live here. It was our house. This kept going with her complaining about every little noise I made and talking about how the house is too big for just the two of us and her son will make better use of it. We're planning on having kids, but that doesn't matter because we paid for the house. One day while I was working in the garden, I overheard my neighbor talking on the phone with her son saying that they need to take action and get the house. I realized that this was more than just a crazy neighbor. It was a serious issue. I decided to take some action to ensure our safety and the safety of our home. I installed security cameras around the perimeter of the house and put up a fence. I also started to keep a log of all the incidents with my neighbor and reported them to the authorities. The police spoke with her, but she continued to cause problems. One evening I came home to find my neighbor and her son standing on my property. They had crossed the fence and were trying to take a look inside the house. I was furious and demanded that they leave immediately, but they refused, saying that the house belonged to them. Things started to escalate quickly, and I knew that I needed to call the police, but before I could do so my neighbor's son lunged at me and we started to fight. It was a vicious struggle, but I managed to get the upper hand and pinned him to the ground. As I was restraining him, my neighbor started to scream and attack me. It was chaos, but eventually the police arrived and arrested both of them. They were charged with trespassing, assault, and harassment. After this incident, my neighbor and her son were forced to move away, and we finally had some peace, but the experience left us traumatized, and we decided to sell the house and move to a new neighborhood. Update: we have now moved to a new neighborhood, and we are happy to have left the traumatic experience behind us. We have a new house which we have made into our dream home. The house is bigger and better than our previous one, and we have even built a fence around the perimeter of the property. We also have started a neighborhood watch program to ensure that everyone is safe and secure. We work together with our neighbors and we all look out for each other. It's been a great experience and we feel lucky to have found such a wonderful community. Looking back, we realize that our previous experience has taught us some valuable lessons. We know that it's important to stand up for ourselves and to take action to protect our home and family, and we're grateful that we were able to move on from the experience and start fresh in a new neighborhood. The next story is titled, Boyfriend's Dad is Lucky We Didn't Call the Cops. Context: my boyfriend 28 MBF and his folks late 60s own a coffee shop, but because his dad Ed doesn't want to listen to anyone else learn how to run a business correctly or pay his son his draw, BF is largely uninvolved and has talked about being bought out. He's still the administrator on the point of sale system though, because his dad has no desire to actually learn how it works or go through the process to take over the account. The coffee shop drama could be a whole series of posts about how they did us dirty. Perhaps another time. We got to bed really late. Okay, early, it was 4:30 a.m., which normally wouldn't be an issue as my BF was scheduled for a late shift, and I'm currently taking time off work to figure out a medical issue. BF turns off his phone volume when he goes to bed. And this is well known to everyone close to us. He's notoriously hard to get a hold of in the mornings. I only hear my phone if it's right under my pillow and the volume and vibration is up at 6:25 am. I started receiving the following text from BF's mom, which I do not hear as I am TFO 6:25 am sorry to bother you. I need BF to call Ed ASAP. His phone is off 7:35 am. Ed is going to come wake BF unless he calls us just before 8:30. The dogs start barking as someone tried to open the locked bedroom door. I wake up panicked as whoever it is starts banging on the door. It then stops for a few moments, then starts again. No one has said anything at this point. Not me, not BF, not the intruder. I get up and go to the closet for the baseball bat and start kicking myself for thinking we would not need a gun when BF had brought it up in the past. We open the bedroom door to find Ed at the end of the hall. He starts yelling about needing the code for the two-factor authentication for the register. I start yelling at Ed, and BF, who's just as angry as I am, has me go back into the bedroom. I put my hearing aids in. At this point, Ed claims to have been knocking on our front door, but neither dog heard him. BF gives him the code, tries to explain to him that coming into our house unannounced is a huge violation of trust and boundaries, not the first major issue. Ed then yells about needing to get the register working. BF kicks him out, and we think that's the end of it. Not 2 minutes later, I receive another text from M824A. And please tell BF to send the new code. We still can't get in. Then we hear the clanging of the metal gate, and more pounding on the front door. We go answer it, and Ed is yelling about needing the new code, and he has a copy of our key in hand. He clearly was going to let himself back, and I lost it at this point and yelled, "You can't just let yourself into our house. What the fuck is wrong with you?" He gave me more BS about needing to get the register working. I screamed, "My ability to be safe in my own home is more important than your shop." He took particular offense to this, yelling back at me, "So you see me as a threat? Am I a threat to you?" I try explaining that I've had my home broken into before his response, "Not by me," over and over, then continues yelling about the shop. I demand the emergency key back, and after yelling a bit more, he shoves it at me. BF had enough and yells at me to go back to the bedroom. He'll handle it. I do, because at this point I'm on the edge of a panic attack. Through the closed bedroom door, I hear more yelling, and after a bit the door slammed. BF called his mom, saying that Ed needed to apologize and that this behavior wasn't acceptable. She asked him, "What does he need to apologize for?" BF tells her, and she's mortified. I then get this text from her, 9:08 a.m. "I'm sorry to have bothered you so much today, and sorry Ed made such a scene." I haven't responded. This man clearly doesn't understand boundaries, doesn't think he needs to be held accountable for anything, and felt entitled to just barge into our house and demand his son fix a tech issue. And for the record, yes, I do in fact see him as a threat. Now both of BF's parents know about my severe PTSD. We know he won't apologize because he genuinely doesn't see a problem with his behavior. It's time for some serious boundaries in a security system. The last story is titled, "My mom has called me a whore for years, but now wants me to get married." My F24 mom has called me a whore since I was a teenager, but now wants me to get married. I grew up with a single mother. Dad left when I was a kid, and I made sure to make life as stress-free as possible for her. I had to make up for my dad leaving. He was physically abusive and would beat my brother when he was a baby by limiting my mother's stress. My mother blames us for sending my father away and ruining any chance of her finding a husband because she had to take care of us. She believes that we must repay that debt. I would walk my little brother to school from the time I was 7. I would wake up early when I was in high school to do my mom's college homework. If I struggled with her assignments or got her a low mark, she would accuse me of trying to sabotage her. I took on a job in high school that would allow me to pay my mom's car insurance, help out with rent, and pay for anything else she needed. I never dated in high school or my early 20s. I went to schoolwork and came home. My home life was chaotic. My mother would demand my older sister strip off her clothes to check for signs that she might be sexually active. My other sister was choked by my mom for standing up for herself. When I was 18 and had my first crush, my mom would text me every day to tell me that my crush would give me HIV and I would die, that I would get pregnant and he would leave me. That crush ended quickly when my sister found her partner. My mom told me that I was not allowed to visit my sister. She said that I was a whore and I wanted to ruin my sister's relationship with her boyfriend. I have no friends. My parents told me to never trust anyone / people will ruin you. My sisters live in cities far away from me, so the only person I have is my mother. My little brother doesn't really speak to anyone now that I'm 24, soon to be 25, and living on my own with no friends or relationship to speak of. My mom is suddenly worried about me. She went from calling me a whore and telling me that I would get HIV to demanding that I start dating for marriage. She told me that her years on this planet are getting shorter, and she wants to see me in a wedding dress and with children of my own someday. She can't believe how selfish I am after everything she's done for me. She wants me to take care of her when she gets older. My sisters have cut her off and wants to see me with a husband by my side. I feel zero connection to my mother, so I can't imagine having children of my own someday. I've completely ruled it out. I've decided that I do best on my own, so dating is not a part of my life. I want to be alone for the rest of my life. I'm really tired, and all I want is peace and quiet. I grew up with a mom that would scream and bang on walls when she didn't get what she wanted. Now that I'm on my own, I relish the silence. I can't give her the life that she's built in her head. Going from whore to housewife to please my mother is not a part of my plans. Now she's back to sending me messages, calling me names / wishing that she had aborted me because I'm selfish and ungrateful. I thought this new year would be different. I prayed that it would be different. I was wrong. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Just as dawn was breaking, Simon found himself standing before an enormous mirror that dominated one wall of his high-rise office. its reflective surface providing a panoramic view of the city's skyscrapers. His mind was busy at work, organizing thoughts and plans for the day ahead, but one particular thought kept tugging at his attention, refusing to be dismissed. With a determined attempt to shift his focus, he redirected his gaze elsewhere in the room. His eyes came to rest upon a young woman who, having completed her cleaning tasks, was meticulously trimming dead leaves from the office's indoor plants. Simon watched her quiet diligence for a moment before approaching her, a small smile playing on his lips. He waited patiently for her to finish her task and turned to face him. As soon as she noticed him, Simon initiated the conversation. "Your name's Julia, isn't it?" he asked. Julia was visibly startled, not expecting any conversation with her employer. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't see you there. I'll be done shortly," she responded, her hands quickly gathering the discarded leaves and pruning scissors. "You didn't answer my question." "Oh yes, sir. I'm Julia. My apologies. I didn't expect you this early. The office clock read 7. The official opening wasn't until 9. Well, you seem so engrossed in your work that I didn't want to disturb you. Disordered plants really bother me, you know." Julia offered him a shy smile. "I'll be done in about 10 minutes. She was cut off before she could complete her sentence. "You've done enough. The plant looks fine to me." Julia glanced around uncertainly. "All right then. May I leave?" "I'm not the one to decide that. If you believe you've finished your work, you should head home and rest." It was clear that Julia had arrived early, and now the office sparkled with cleanliness. Simon Feist's early arrival at the office was intentional. He had barely caught any sleep last night, staying awake until 2 in the morning when the police called him to collect his misbehaving son. In fact, he was so frustrated he wanted to tell them off and leave the issue for them to handle. His patient was running thin with his son's repeated mishaps. He was 26 but still lacked basic sense. However, his wife Melinda stirred and asserted her viewpoint that Simon should go get their son. Reluctantly, he drove to the police station. After a few stern slaps to his son and his friends, Simon drove each of them home. But at the time he returned home, the sun was about to rise. Seeing Melinda and the maid nursing his son with tea in the compress, he fought the urge to reprimand his son once more to instill some sense of proper behavior in him. Peter was brought up with every luxury and opportunity a child could ever dream of. He was Simon's most cherished project, his most significant investment. From a tender age, Peter was showered with top-notch private tutoring. Simon spared no expense in employing the best teachers and trainers to cultivate his son's talents. In his younger years, Peter was an obedient and promising child. He was receptive to his parents and excelled in middle school, earning him multiple accolades in academics and sports. Peter showed all signs of being an ideal successor to Simon. However, as time passed, a subtle but disturbing change crept into their lives. Peter began showing signs of rebellion and became increasingly difficult to manage. After finishing 9th grade, Simon, in an attempt to instill discipline and focus, sent him to one of the country's best boarding schools. Peter's educational journey then led him to a prestigious college, but this too ended prematurely when he decided to drop out after just a year and a half. For years had elapsed since Peter returned to his hometown after dropping out of college. Not once had he experienced a day's work during that time. But what Peter lacked in employment, he made up for in revelry. Despite Simon repeatedly blocking his credit card to teach him the value of money, his mother invariably supplied her own card to him. Flaunting the family name, Peter roamed the town with every misstep conveniently overlooked by those who knew of his lineage. Any discussion about the necessity for him to shape up and act responsibly seemed to go in one ear and out the other, making no impact on Peter's carefree existence. This time, however, Peter had truly crossed the line. Accompanied by the sons of Simon's business associates, they had brazenly stolen a police car, careening through the city in a drunken joyride. The consequences of this act, especially regarding what Simon would now owe the police chief, remained uncertain. Simon and the police chief were well acquainted, and Simon had made it abundantly clear that his tolerance for his son's antics was wearing thin. The gravity of his latest fiasco was not lost on him. Snapping back to present, Simon turned his attention back to Julia. Julia, tell me, why is a young woman like yourself working as a cleaner? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Julia responded with a modest smile. I'm taking evening classes. I can only work during the early morning and evening because I need to take care of my mother during the day. Occasionally, our neighbor helps out, but she has her own life to manage. So I clean office spaces in the morning like here, and work a part-time waitress shop in the evenings. Simon was caught off guard by the weight of responsibility she carried at such a young age. Julia, why do you have to work so much? Don't you also need time to focus on your studies? He inquired. She shrugged, an air of resilience surrounding her. I've been managing it for a while now. My mother is seriously ill, and her medications are costly. I also have a brother who, let's say, doesn't make the best life choices. Sometimes things happen, but it doesn't matter. I'm sorry for the talk. I finished my job here. I should be on my way now. Simon found himself in a state of disbelief. The encounter with Julia had been a stark reminder of the harsh realities that some people face daily. People just a few floors below his office in the towering skyscraper. As he watched her leave, he resolved to learn more about her. By evening, Simon had gathered a wealth of information about Julia. Initially, he had suspected that she might have been exaggerating her circumstances, but upon confirmation of every detail, he felt a profound sense of admiration. Despite his social stature and privilege, he felt humbled by Julia's resilience and commitment. This interaction opened his eyes to the trials and tribulations of the many people who struggle just to get by each day. Recognizing Julia's strong work ethic and her commitment to supporting her family, Simon felt a strong urge to help her. He dialed his accountant and instructed an increase in Julia's salary. As a respected and effective leader within the company, his decision was accepted without question. Upon receiving a firm affirmation from the accountant, he ended the call. Arriving home that evening, Simon noticed a group of his son's friends lurking near their front gate, one of their cars hidden around a nearby corner. He observed them from a distance, his mind turning. Are they planning more mischief? How much longer will this go on? A wave of frustration welled up within him, just as he noticed Peter descending the house steps towards him. Hey Peter, did you get enough rest? Simon called out. Peter, taken aback by his father's unusually calm demeanor, shot him a suspicious look. Ooh, yeah? I slept well? Why do you ask that? Just curious, that's all. Can you step inside for a moment? Simon led the way back into the house without a backward glance. Peter, sensing a serious conversation looming, had no choice but to follow. He knew his father had a long fuse, but when it reached its end, the consequences were usually unpleasant. This is how Peter found himself enrolled in a strict educational institution in England. Not only was he required to abide by a regimented routine, but he also had to resume his studies. What did I even do? Peter thought to himself. We were just messing around. No one got hurt and the car's fine. His mother glanced warily between her husband and son. Did you forget something, son? But before Peter could reply, his father answered for him. Of course he forgot. He forgot that he's a human being, not a wild animal. Can anyone explain why I should be the one ashamed of my son's actions? Why is it that others can take pride in their children while I'm left feeling embarrassed? Simon dear, but he... Silence. Simon had only raised his voice at Melinda twice before in their life together, and both instances were due to Peter. Stunned, she fell silent as Simon extracted the bundle of newspapers from his briefcase. Here, take a good look at your precious son. The photographs were damning. One could clearly see Peter shamelessly baring his backside as they zoomed past a police station and a stolen police car. Peter had to fight the urge to burst out laughing at the sight of the pictures. He knew well enough that laughing now would land him in deeper trouble. His mind then flashed to the party plan for later that evening. Damn, it seems like I won't be making it to the party tonight, Peter silently lamented. His father then turned to him, his gaze stern. Whether you like it or not, I am determined to mold you into a responsible man. If I fail, I'll simply evict you and see how you fare on your own. For the first time, Peter felt a punch in the gut at his father's words. Feelings of betrayal and abandonment flooded him. In that moment, Peter resolved to prove his maturity and independence. I can make my own decisions about what to do and when, he retorted, sensing a turning point. This response was unexpected to Simon. In past confrontations regarding Peter's misadventures, the conversations usually ended with admonitions and promises of better behavior. Simon was so inflamed by his son's rebuttal that he turned an alarming shade of purple. Whipping out his phone, he dialed a number. "Head of security, I need you immediately," he commanded into the receiver. In the midst of the heated exchange, Melinda quietly approached Peter, wrapping her arms around him in a comforting embrace. She understood Simon well. Once he committed to a course of action, there was no deviating from it. She had repeatedly warned Peter to tread cautiously, playing the role of empathetic mediator in the family, and often defending him. Now, however, she was certain Peter would have to confront the repercussions of his actions, despite her consistent pleas for him to be more considerate. Her heart ached as she realized the extent of the predicament her son had gotten himself into. The head of security arrived within 15 minutes. Throughout the wait, Simon remained seated, glaring at his son with a stern countenance. "Mr. Feist?" "Yes, Hank. Come in." A tall, well-built man made his way towards his employer. "I want you to take a good look at this thoughtless individual." Simon gestured towards his son, maintaining a professional demeanor. Hank didn't flinch. "Yes, sir, of course. That's Peter, your son. Do whatever you have to. Put him in shackles, assign guards. But he must not step foot off the property until I say otherwise. Is that clear?" "Absolutely. We'll ensure that." "Dismissed." With a curt nod, Hank exited the room. Peter, left alone with his father, was dumbfounded. "Have you lost your mind? This is not the Middle Ages. You can't discipline children like this anymore." Simon let out a scornful chuckle. He took a few steps, his hands tucked into his pockets, before halting and looking Peter dead in the eyes. "This isn't your punishment, son. This is merely a measure to buy me some time to devise your actual punishment. And trust me, I will come up with one. Now go to your room." "But Dad, I've said my piece." Simon's voice echoed in the room, leaving no room for further arguments. His decision was final. Peter was left with no choice but to accept the bitter reality and retreat. The following morning, Simon found himself awake unusually early. A glance at the clock revealed it was a mere 5 a.m. He felt no desire to return to sleep, and the thought of remaining at home wasn't appealing either. With a sense of quiet determination, he rose from his bed, swiftly got ready, and decided to start his day ahead of schedule, heading on to his workplace. Simon harbored a profound love for his work. Having constructed his own steel company from the ground up, he was now among the wealthiest individuals in the state. His journey into the world of steel processing began when he was just a teenager, working as an ordinary laborer in a scrap metal yard. His rise from humble beginnings to a titan of industry had been a result of his relentless dedication and an undying work ethic. In his early years, Simon was raised in a family that didn't have much. His father, Tom Feist, was employed in a steel mill and worked tirelessly to keep food on the table. Simon's mother, Linda, was a preschool teacher who nurtured young minds with unwavering dedication. However, when Simon was only 5 years old, tragedy struck as Linda was fatally struck by a runaway truck. The loss devastated Tom. The love of his life, the woman he cherished, had been taken from him abruptly, leaving a gaping void that proved difficult to fill. His grieving period extended over a year, casting a somber shadow over their lives. Despite his tender age of 6, Simon possessed an uncanny maturity. He recognized the self-destructive pattern his father was sinking into as he mourned the loss of his wife. Like his father, Simon yearned for his mother's presence, but he understood that he wouldn't see her again. One day, in a bid to lift his father's spirits, he mentioned his desire to have siblings to play with. That seemingly innocent request acted as a catalyst for Tom. A few months later, Tom began dating a young woman from their town, and not long after, they tied the knot. A year later, Simon welcomed twin brothers, Sam and Ben, into the family. He swiftly adapted to his role as a big brother, spending endless hours playing with the twins and showering them with the love and care he once wished for himself. Much like his father, Simon didn't excel in academics. Instead, he had a keen interest in mechanics and heavy machinery. Tom frequently took him to the steel mill, and Simon was instantly captivated by the world of steel processing, setting the stage for his future endeavors. Simon plunged into work at the metal yard in ninth grade. A stark contrast to his twin brothers who thrived academically. Sam and Ben excelled in school, consistently ranking among the top students. Despite the difference in their pursuits, Simon harbored no resentment or feelings of inadequacy. He was their older brother and he was proud of their achievements. Whispers from people outside their immediate family circle suggested that Jenny, Simon's stepmother, might not have the same affection for him as she did for her biological sons, but these speculations couldn't have been further from the truth. Jenny loved Simon deeply and saw him as an integral part of their family. He was, after all, the older brother to her twin sons. However, tragedy struck once again when a metal bar fell onto Tom's knee during work. The accident incapacitated Tom, forcing Simon and Jenny to shoulder the responsibility of providing for the family. Simon was acutely aware of the transformative power of education. He promised himself and his family that he would do everything in his power to ensure that his brothers received the quality education they deserved. Simon's commitment to his family's welfare was a testament to his maturity and responsibility, qualities that would serve him well in his future. His success didn't come from luck or overnight brilliance, but rather from years of relentless dedication, sweat, and learning on the job. Even when he had been a simple worker, handling scraps in the yard, he had always been inquisitive. He used to ask his seniors about the processes, materials, and business side of things. He wasn't content with just knowing how to do his job. He wanted to understand how everything worked. His education didn't stop after high school. Despite not attending college like his brothers, he continued learning on the job, not only about the practical side of things, but also about business, management, and innovation. His brothers, Sam and Ben, went on to become consultants. They used their formal education and business acumen to help Simon transform the small steel company into a large industry player. They formed an effective team with Simon's practical experience and industry knowledge, combining well with his brother's strategic and management insights. Through his own journey, Simon came to deeply understand the value of hard work, perseverance, and continuous learning. These values were instilled in him from his early years and stayed with him as he led his company to success. He also understood the importance of family and loyalty. His brothers had stood by him, contributing their expertise to his dream, and he had always been there for them. Given his background, it wasn't surprising that he was dismayed by his son's lack of discipline and focus. He wanted Peter to understand that life wasn't just about enjoying the fruits of someone else's labor, but about hard work, responsibility, and making a meaningful contribution. Simon arrived at the office earlier than usual and saw Julia attentively polishing the glass entrance doors. She noticed him and looked surprised. "Mr. Feist, they're quite early today," she said, still holding on to her cleaning supplies. "Yes, I had trouble sleeping. Julia, would you be able to find me some coffee and a small bite to eat?" "The secretary won't be in until 8, she responded with a weary smile. "Of course, Mr. Feist, I'll get you those right away." Soon they were sitting in Simon's office, a warm cup of coffee in his hand. Simon observed Julia from across his desk. She was a pretty girl, but her tired eyes betrayed her strenuous life. Yet her voice was vibrant and lively. He noticed her glancing at him, curiosity in her eyes. "Is something on your mind, sir?" she asked, unable to hold back her concern. Her words tugged at Simon's heartstrings when he found himself battling tears. He realized that it had been a while since someone genuinely cared about him. "Even the wealthiest among us shed tears," he mused, recalling a line from a movie. Inexplicably, Simon found himself opening up to Julia. Felt good to have someone listen. Julia paid close attention, nodding every so often, and then said with a warm smile, "You know, Mr. Feist, having it all doesn't always guarantee happiness. You may look at me and think I have it rough with all the work and taking care of my sick mother, but I wouldn't say it's tough. It's just life. It's as beautiful or as harsh as anyone else's. The best part about me is that I stop myself from complaining. I choose to be happy with what I have." Simon was touched by her words and felt a deep sense of respect for her. "Julia, could you tell me more about your mother?" "My mother used to be a clerk at a juvenile detention center," Julia began, her voice steady. "One evening, she was coming home from work when she saw a group of teenagers fighting on the street. She couldn't ignore it, Not when she knew too well the consequences that could follow for those kids. So she tried to break up the fight. One of the boys pushed her and she fell, hitting the curb hard. She needed multiple surgeries after that. And to live without constant pain, she relies heavily on medication. She needs another operation. But her insurance only covered a small portion of the expenses. I've been trying to cover the rest, but the cost of future surgeries. Julia trailed off, looking down at her hands. Simon was silent for a moment, digesting the information. A crazy idea formed in his hand, one he wasn't even sure he should voice. He surprised himself when he blurted out, "Julia, how old are you?" Taken aback by the abrupt shift in conversation, she looked at him with wide eyes. 22, she answered. I have a proposition for you. He continued, speaking slowly to ensure he chose his words correctly. Would you be interested in an opportunity to earn a substantial amount of money? You could afford your mother's operation and alter your current lifestyle. Suspicion flickered in her eyes. What do I have to do? Kill someone? She joked, trying to lighten the heavy atmosphere. Simon gave a half smile. Not quite, but you're not entirely off track. I need you to marry my son. Julia choked on her coffee, a fit of coughing following. Excuse me? She gasped once she recovered. Julia, Simon began, his voice calm and reassuring. I have a plan. Trust me. As Simon elaborated on his plan, Julia struggled to grasp the reality of what he was suggesting. The enormity of his proposition left her reeling, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. Yet despite the unusual nature of the arrangement, she couldn't help but consider it. The thought of being able to provide for her mother's medical needs was all-consuming. It wasn't about love or marriage. It was a business deal, a contract, a chance to drastically improve the quality of her mother's life. Simon watched her as she processed the proposition, his gaze steady. You don't have to decide right now, he reassured her, leaning back in his chair. Take some time. Think it over. But remember, Julia, this is a unique opportunity. One that could change your life and your mother's life for the better. She nodded slowly, her mind racing. I'll think about it, Mr. Feist. She managed to stammer, standing up and leaving the room in a daze. As she exited, Simon sighed heavily, sinking back into his chair. He had planted the seed. Now all he could do was wait and see if it would take root. Peter found himself standing at the altar, his gaze lingering on the woman beside him, Julia. She looked beautiful in her wedding gown, her face a mix of determination and apprehension. He couldn't believe that his father had orchestrated this entire event. To the world it was an elegant wedding, but to him it felt like a bizarre dream. They exchanged vows as rehearsed, the words leaving their lips almost mechanically. As they exited the church, Peter couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping in. But then he saw Simon's stern face and knew there was no joking around. The wedding reception was held at a grand restaurant. A lavish spread was laid out. The hall was buzzing with their father's business acquaintances, but Peter felt it chill amidst the warm merriment. He looked around, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in. He turned to Simon, disbelief etched in his features. Dad, this is a joke, right? No, Peter, it's not. Simon's voice was firm, devoid of any emotion. He explained the situation, how a lawsuit was impending, and the only solution was this hastily arranged marriage to a girl from the complainant's family. He told Peter about the change he would have to make, living in the country, providing for his family, starting afresh. Peter felt a surge of anger. You can't just decide this for me. Are you out of your mind? The stoic expression on Simon's face didn't waver. Peter, there is no going back now. You've had countless chances and you've wasted them all. It's time you learn to take responsibility. Frustrated, Peter excused himself and went to the restroom. Alone, he let out a bitter laugh. The reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar. A groom forced into maturity overnight. But Peter was a rebel at heart. He would go along with his charade for now, but once the fanfare settled down, he would reclaim his freedom. Peter was not one to be controlled, not by his father, not by anyone. As the wedding celebration carried on, Simon was approached by Mark, a well-known businessman who was both a friend and associate. Simon, you've truly taken us by surprise, Mark declared, his tone carrying a mix of shock and amusement. Simon responded with a grin. Well, I'm glad you're having fun, Mark. Mark leaned in closer, his voice barely a whisper as he asked, "Do you really think you can change him?" Simon looked at him, his smile fading into a frown, while Mark let out a sly chuckle, continuing, "The reality is that we ourselves are to blame, and nothing can change them now." Simon cast a glance at his new daughter-in-law and chuckled. "Well, we'll see about that." He was then interrupted by a call on his phone and excused himself to answer it. Julia, the new Mrs. Feist, was unconcerned about the opinion swirling around her. She understood that her life could take unexpected turns, but at the moment, she was indifferent. Her focus was her mother's health, and when she received a call from the hospital informing her that all her mother's medical bills had been covered and the operation paid for, her next task was to find a wedding dress. Without fuss, she selected the first dress she found and tried it on. As the wedding festivities concluded, all the guests departed. Peter and Julia were chauffeured to their new home in the country. As the car pulled up in front of a humble, rustic house, Peter looked on in disbelief. This is where we're living," he stammered. "Yes, it is. Now quit dawdling and get inside. We have an early start tomorrow," Julia commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. The following day, it dawned on Peter that not only was there no honeymoon in sight, but he wasn't even being waited on hand and foot like he was accustomed to. His new bride was absent most of the day, leaving early in the morning for work and only returning in the evening to seclude herself in her room with her books. On one occasion, Peter knocked on her bedroom door, irritation lining his voice. "Excuse me, aren't you supposed to cook for your husband?" he demanded, but his question fell on deaf ears. Julia continued to ignore him, unswayed by his protests. A week later, Peter realized that he needed to find a job. He aimlessly roamed the small town, hunting for any kind of work that would earn him some money. His journey led him to an unexpected place, a steel warehouse. It was the last place he'd ever thought he'd find himself in, but desperate times called for desperate measures. That evening, Peter came home in an entirely different route. He had secured his first job. Bursting through the door of the house, he couldn't help but boast about his day to Julia. He noticed her glance at his rust-stained t-shirt, and then she simply smiled, not uttering a word in return. In response to his news, Julia began to silently set the table. The sight of it was foreign to Peter, but it filled him with a sense of accomplishment. For the first time since he moved into that house, he was served dinner. It was a small victory, but a significant change in their daily routine. Over time, their interactions gradually evolved from the initial estrangement to a level of familiarity. They began to converse more, sharing anecdotes and even indulging in lighthearted banter. Each day, a strange longing to return home earlier and see Julia started creeping into Peter's heart. It was an unfamiliar feeling, but he didn't shy away from it. Their relationship began to bloom subtly, transforming from a mere contract to a genuine bond that was warm and comforting. Half the year had elapsed. Simon, quite frankly, was wary of the derisive comments from his business associates. He had even begun to feel a pang of sympathy for his son. Peter's friends seemed to be reveling in their usual fun and frolic, while his own son was banished to the countryside. To maintain the facade, Julia had even resigned from her job so as not to arouse Peter's suspicions. Simon hadn't heard directly from Peter for quite some time. He and Julia had agreed to communicate only in case of emergencies. Otherwise, he just expected a simple assurance from her that everything was fine. One evening, Simon returned home from work to find his wife Melinda visibly concerned. "Darling, where's our son? Is he really okay? You keep showing me these messages that he's doing fine, but we haven't seen him for months." Simon had been anticipating this conversation with his wife, surprised that it had taken this long for her to express her concerns. It was a testament to the level of respect she had for her husband's decisions. Secretly, Simon yearned to see his son too. He had been suppressing the desire to simply show up at his son's doorstep, but now that his wife had finally voiced her fears, he resolved to act. Enough is enough. Tomorrow I'll go and bring him back, he decided internally. Hank, his informer, had reported just a week ago that Peter had received a promotion, and that something seemed to be brewing between him and Julia. Simon, however, dismissed it as highly improbable. The original agreement with Julia was to seclude Peter from his harmful circle of friends. Simon knew his son all too well. People didn't just change overnight. Taking the decision, he made his way to their humble dwelling the next day. As he alighted from his car and scrutinized the small house, he wondered how his son had managed to live in such a place. He ascended the few steps and knocked on the door. The delicious aroma wafting from the inside was inviting. "Come in," a voice called out. As he pushed the door open and stepped inside, the sight before him left him momentarily stunned. Julia was laying the table and there was his own son who had never lifted a finger before, washing the dishes. The smiles that graced their faces were genuine and warm. "Dad? Wow, haven't seen you in a while, huh? What brings you here?" Peter jested, but his eyes betrayed a sincere happiness upon seeing his father. Julia, too, smiled warmly at Simon. "Hello, Mr. Feist. Do come in. We're just about to celebrate Peter's latest achievement." Simon blinked. Was this a dream? As they gathered around the table, a mouth-watering aroma of roasted chicken filled the room. Finally, driven by curiosity, he had to ask, "What's the achievement we're celebrating?" "Well, Dad," Peter began, "I secured a job at the local steel mill. You know, the one owned by your competitor? I started off as a loader and recently got promoted. I proposed a few changes to improve the plant operations and believe it or not, they promoted me to be an assistant to the plant manager. I even got a bonus. We're planning to use it for some home improvements and thought we'd have a little celebration as well." Simon was taken aback by his son's words. The last he remembered, Peter was a reckless boy, more interested in living off his father's fortune than anything else. He'd never shown any initiative or responsibility in his life, but the man sitting before him now was a completely different person. He seemed mature, confident, and most surprisingly content. Home improvements? That was all Simon could manage. He saw a spark in Julia's eyes and there was a genuine contentment in his son's demeanor. Simon felt a rush of happiness. He immediately dialed his wife's number and urged her to join them, abruptly ending the call before she could question him. Melinda, anxious and not knowing what to expect, asked her driver Hank to rush her to the house immediately. Fearing the worst, she burst into the house, only to find them all chatting and laughing. Relief washed over her and she broke down in tears. After a few minutes, when she realized the situation wasn't as dire as she had initially thought, she began to laugh along with them. The atmosphere was light and cheerful, a stark contrast to what she had expected. The family spent the rest of the evening enjoying dinner together. Afterwards, Melinda and Julia found themselves in the kitchen, clearing up the table and engaging in light-hearted banter. Simon, on the other hand, had asked Peter to join him on the porch for some fresh air. Simon felt a knot of tension in his stomach, contemplating how he could bring up a particularly sensitive topic. Gathering his courage, he finally spoke. "Son, there's something you need to know." Peter's face broke into an amused grin. "Dad, if you're talking about what I think you're talking about, then there's no need." Simon was taken aback. "Julia told me everything. It came up when I asked her to fulfill her marital duties. If you catch my drift," Peter said with a chuckle. He paused for a moment before continuing. "You were pretty shrewd in choosing Julia, but I gotta tell you she wasn't interested in me at all in the beginning." Peter saw his father's stunned expression and couldn't help but chuckle. He'd caught his father off guard, and that moment was priceless. "Actually, you know what, Dad? Thank you for everything. If it weren't for your harsh decision, I would have never met Julia, and I'd probably never known what wonderful women exist in this world. So you guys are already..." Simon let the question trail off, feeling a tad uncomfortable. "Yes, Dad," Peter confirmed, grinning. Simon's initial plan hadn't quite gone as expected, but rather than failing, it had evolved into something much more profound and beneficial than he could ever anticipate. His attempt to teach his son a lesson had unintentionally led to a transformation, a new beginning for Peter and in some ways for their entire family. "Dad, if us staying together wasn't in your original plan, don't fret. We're happy here and I can manage things. I may not become a millionaire like you, but I'll do everything in my power to provide for my family." Simon silently turned around and walked back into the house, his heart filled with a strange mixture of pride and relief. "Julia, enough of this," Simon announced, his voice firm. "Start packing your suitcases. I can't have my son helping my competitors out. You both are moving back home with us." A year later, Simon had the pleasure of welcoming his grandson into their big loving family. Peter and Julia became integral parts of Simon's business. Peter, with his newfound diligence and discipline, quickly ascended the ranks to become one of the top managers. Julia, leveraging her strong communication skills, assumed a pivotal role in the communications department. Their lives had changed dramatically, but they were happier than they ever were before. Julia's mother had successfully recovered from her illness, and the family decided to celebrate this victory with a grand dinner. Even though Julia and Peter insisted she move in with them, she politely declined. She expressed her desire to continue living in the tranquility of the countryside, which she had grown to love. "This is exactly why Julia is invaluable to my son," Simon declared, his voice filled with warmth and respect. "We'll have plenty of time at your house, I assure you." Their room echoed with laughter and clinks of glasses, marking another beautiful chapter in their lives. A few weeks later, Simon was sitting in his office when there was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," he called out. "Mr. Feist, someone is here to see you." "Let them in, I was expecting them." His friend and business associate, George, walked in, his face unusually pale. "What happened to you, George?" Simon asked, concern clear in his voice. "Simon, I don't know what to do with Nate. He's got off the rails." "What's the issue this time?" "They were involved in a hit and run. Thankfully, the victim survived, but he's a lawyer." "And guess who was driving?" Simon sighed. "I can only guess. Have you considered not bailing him out? Let him deal with the consequences for once." "That's easy for you to say. Your Peter is doing so well building a successful company from scratch." "Did he make another acquisition?" "Yeah, he plans to start a tool manufacturing facility in the city," Simon said, hint of pride in his voice. He then looked at his friend and smiled. "George, remember how you guys—" Simon started, but George interrupted him. I know. We were wrong, okay? We laughed then, but I guess it's not likely to find another Julia for Nate." Simon nodded in agreement. "That's true. Julia is indeed one in a billion. But do consider my advice. Let your son face the consequences of his actions. Just don't let things get too out of hand. Pretend you're not interfering." "Thanks, Simon. I'll give it a shot," George said, a hint of hope in his voice. Simon leaned back in his chair, reflecting on his journey. He was reminded of an old saying, "Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times." The saying seemed to fit both his son and his daughter-in-law Julia, but he hoped they could prevent the cycle